The pool pump's final gurgle echoed through the midnight air as Marcus watched 20,000 gallons of crystal-clear water disappear into the storm drain. Tomorrow, his neighbor Karen would discover her pristine lawn browning at the edges, her prized rose garden wilting despite the automatic sprinklers she'd bragged about for months. She'd call the police, screaming about water theft, demanding justice for her dying plants. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Marcus had been documenting every drop of water she'd been stealing from his supply line for the past 6 months. And when those body cameras started rolling, when the evidence files opened, when the truth finally surfaced like a drowning secret gasping for air, Karen's perfectly manicured world would crumble faster than her thirsty garden. The pool lights cast dancing shadows across the water's surface as Marcus Chen stood at the edge of his backyard sanctuary watching the last of 20,000 gallons spiral down the drain. The mechanical hum of the pump filled the night air, a funeral dirge for what had once been his pride and joy. 6 months of planning had led to this moment, 6 months of careful documentation, strategic patience, and growing rage that had finally crystallized into this single, devastating act of calculated revenge. "You sure about this, Marcus?" his brother David asked, shifting nervously beside the pool equipment. "This is a lot of water, a lot of money." Marcus didn't look away from the swirling vortex. "Every drop she stole from me, every single drop." The numbers were burned into his memory. 847 gallons in March, 1,203 in April, 1,756 in May, the digital water meter readings he'd photographed religiously. The bills that had climbed steadily higher while his usage remained constant. His neighbor Karen Whitmore had been systematically stealing his water for months, and tomorrow she was going to learn that actions had consequences. "The cops are going to think you're crazy," David warned, checking his watch. "Draining a pool at midnight? Come on, man. Let them think what they want." Marcus's voice carried the weight of months of accumulated fury. "I've got documentation going back to January. Every pipe connection, every bill, every drop of water that disappeared from my line into her precious garden." The pool was nearly empty now, revealing the stark concrete walls that had been hidden beneath the surface. Marcus had spent 3 years perfecting this backyard oasis, the infinity edge that seemed to blend with the horizon, the underwater lighting system that turned evening swims into magical experiences, the automated cleaning system that kept the water crystal clear. It had been his escape from the corporate grind, his sanctuary after brutal 14-hour days at the architecture firm, until Karen Whitmore moved in next door. "Remember when she first introduced herself?" David asked, settling into one of the poolside chairs, all smiles and homemade cookies. "What a lovely pool, Marcus. I hope we can be good neighbors." Marcus's jaw tightened. He remembered that day perfectly. Karen, in her pressed khakis and pearls, her silver hair styled in what she probably thought was an elegant bob, her eyes already calculating how she could exploit his property. She'd been so charming, so apologetic about her little renovation projects that might cause some noise, so concerned about maintaining property values in their upscale neighborhood. She played the long game, Marcus said. I'll give her that. The theft had been sophisticated, almost artistic in its execution. Karen had hired a landscaping company to install an elaborate irrigation system for her garden that had somehow bloomed into a neighborhood, showcased despite the ongoing drought restrictions while the city mandated water conservation measures. Karen's roses flourished. Her lawn maintained that perfect emerald green. Her decorative fountain babbled cheerfully day and night. Marcus had noticed his water bills climbing first. Then came the pressure drops, subtle at first, then more pronounced. His pool's automatic refill system had been working overtime, the water level dropping mysteriously overnight, he'd assumed. It was evaporation, maybe a small leak in the system. It had taken him 3 weeks to discover the truth. The discovery had been accidental. Marcus had been in his garage, searching for a wrench to adjust the pool's pH balance system, when he'd knocked over a box of old blueprints. As he'd gathered the scattered papers, one had caught his attention: the original plumbing schematic for his property, showing the main water line that ran along the property boundary. That's when he'd noticed the discrepancy. The pipe that should have terminated at his property line continued into Karen's yard. Not just a few feet, but nearly 30 yards, branching into an intricate network that fed her entire irrigation system. She'd tapped into his water supply during her renovation, hiding the theft behind permits and professional landscaping. "You should have seen her face when I confronted her," Marcus told David, watching the last few inches of water disappear. Pure innocence. "Oh my goodness, Marcus, there must be some mistake. I'm sure the city would never allow such a thing." The confrontation had been 3 weeks ago, played out over the fence line that separated their properties. Karen had been watering her roses. Marcus had realized, with bitter irony, when he'd approached with the evidence: photos of the pipe connections, copies of his water bills, documentation of the theft that had been ongoing for months. Karen had listened with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult people. Her expression had remained sympathetic, concerned, even helpful. She'd suggested he'd contact the city, recommended a plumber, offered to look into the situation, all while continuing to water her garden with his stolen water. She actually said, "I should be grateful," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Grateful that her beautiful garden was improving both our property values, as if I should thank her for stealing from me." The pool pump shuddered. To a stop, its job complete. The silence that followed felt profound, almost sacred. Marcus stared into the empty concrete basin, seeing not just a drained pool, but a declaration of war. "What's the plan now?" David asked. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through the dozens of photographs he'd taken over the past months. Images of pipe connections, water meter readings, bills, and most importantly, the time-stamped photos of Karen's flourishing garden during the height of the drought restrictions. "Now we wait," he said. "Karen's automatic sprinkler system is set to activate at 5 a.m. She's never changed the timing. I've been watching. When those sprinklers try to draw water from my line and find nothing, when her water pressure drops to 0, she's going to panic. And then she's going to call the police. She's going to scream about water theft, about her dying garden, about the neighborhood property values. She's going to demand justice." David shook his head. "You're assuming she will." Marcus's certainty was absolute. Karen Whitmore has never faced a consequence in her entire privileged life. She's going to assume this is some kind of attack, some conspiracy against her perfect little world. She won't consider that maybe, just maybe, the water was never hers. To begin with, the two brothers sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the empty pool. Marcus had calculated the cost nearly $400 in water, plus the expense of refilling and rebalancing the chemicals. It was a significant financial hit, but nothing compared to the thousands Karen had stolen from him over the months. "You know she's going to deny everything," David said finally. "Of course she will. That's what makes this so perfect." Marcus stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. "I've got 6 months of documentation, photos, bills, even video footage of her bragging to the other neighbors about her water-wise gardening techniques. When the police start investigating, when they see the evidence, Karen's going to discover that playing victim doesn't work when you're actually the perpetrator." A light flickered on in Karen's kitchen window. Marcus glanced at his watch. 12:47 a.m. She was probably getting a glass of water, never imagining that tomorrow would bring the reckoning she'd so carefully avoided. "There's something else," Marcus said, his voice taking on a new edge. "Something I haven't told you." David looked up sharply. "What?" "Karen's not just stealing water. She's been reporting me to the city for excessive water usage, 3 times in the past 2 months. Each report claiming I'm violating drought restrictions, wasting water on non-essential luxury features." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. "She's been trying to get your pool permits revoked," David realized. "Exactly. While she's been stealing my water, she's been filing complaints about me using too much water. She's been trying to eliminate the competition." For her theft, the kitchen light in Karen's house went dark, but Marcus continued staring at her property. The elaborate garden that had been built on stolen water, the perfect lawn that had thrived during the drought, the decorative fountain that had babbled cheerfully while his own water bills climbed higher and higher. "So what happens when she calls the police?" David asked. Marcus smiled for the first time in months, a cold, calculating expression that would have made Karen Whitmore very nervous if she'd been able to see it. "When she calls the police, she's going to tell them that someone stole her water. She's going to demand they investigate, insist they find the person responsible." Karen Whitmore's day began at 5:30 a.m., exactly as it had every morning for the past 15 years. Coffee, first French roast, 2 sugars. Splash of cream, followed by her morning inspection of what she considered the crown jewel of Maple Ridge Drive, her garden. She slipped on her silk robe and stepped onto the back patio, breathing in the morning air with the satisfaction of someone who had carefully orchestrated every aspect of her environment. The automatic sprinkler system should have finished its cycle 30 minutes ago, leaving her roses glistening with perfectly distributed moisture. Her lawn emerald and pristine, despite the city's ongoing drought restrictions. Instead, she found devastation. Her prized hybrid tea roses, the ones that had won 3 consecutive neighborhood garden awards, were drooping like wilted funeral flowers. The petals that should have been vibrant crimson and gold were already curling at the edges, their color fading to sickly brown. The fountain in the center of her garden sat silent, its basin cracked and dry. But it was her lawn that made her gasp audibly. The Kentucky bluegrass that had been her pride for months now showed ugly brown patches spreading like a disease across the carefully manicured surface. The sprinkler heads sat motionless, no longer releasing the steady streams of water that had kept her property the envy of every neighbor on the block. "No, no, no," Karen whispered, rushing barefoot across the dying grass to the nearest sprinkler head. She knelt down, pressing the manual activation button. Nothing, not even a trickle. Panic began to claw at her chest as she ran from one sprinkler to the next, jabbing at controls, twisting valves, desperately searching for any sign of water flow. The elaborate irrigation system that had cost her $12,000, well, cost her practically nothing since Marcus had been paying for the water, had completely failed. She hurried to the side of the house where the main water controls were housed in a decorative utility box. Her hands shook as she opened the panel, revealing a maze of pipes, gauges, and digital readouts that she'd never bothered to understand. The landscaping company had installed everything. All she'd needed to do was enjoy the results. The water pressure gauge read 0. "This is impossible," she said aloud, her voice rising with each word. "This is absolutely impossible." Karen had lived in affluent neighborhoods her entire adult life. She understood the unspoken rules of suburban warfare, the careful maintenance of appearances, the subtle competitions over property values, the importance of never letting anyone see weakness. A dying garden wasn't just a landscaping problem. It was a public humiliation that would undermine everything she'd built in this community. She grabbed her phone and dialed the landscaping company's emergency line. "Martinez Landscaping, this is Tony." "This is Karen Whitmore on Maple Ridge Drive," she said, forcing her voice to remain controlled despite the hysteria building in her chest. "My entire irrigation system has failed. Everything is dying. I need someone here immediately, ma'am. We're booked solid today, but I can have someone out tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Karen's composure cracked. "Do you understand what you installed for me? Do you know how much money I've invested in this garden? I need someone here now, not tomorrow. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Whitmore, but system failures usually involve the main water supply. You might want to check with your utility company first." Karen ended the call and immediately dialed the city's water department. 20 minutes later, she stood in her dying garden wearing a hastily thrown-on sundress and sandals, watching a city worker named Pete examine her water meter. He was a weathered man in his 50s who moved with the deliberate pace of someone who'd seen every possible water crisis the city could produce. "Well, there's your problem," Pete said, straightening up from the meter. "Your water's been shut off. Karen's voice climbed an octave. "That's impossible. I pay my bills. I've never missed a payment in my life." Pete consulted his tablet, scrolling through digital records. "According to our system, this meter hasn't registered any usage for the past 6 months. The automated systems flagged it as potentially abandoned and scheduled it for disconnection." 6 months. Karen felt the world tilting around her. "That's ridiculous. Look at my garden. Look at my lawn. Does this look like a property that hasn't used water in 6 months?" Pete looked around at the elaborate landscaping, his expression growing puzzled. "You're right, that is strange. This level of irrigation would require significant water usage. Let me check something." He walked along the property line, following the path of the water main. Karen trailed behind him, her anxiety mounting with each step. When Pete reached the boundary between her property and Marcus Chen's, he stopped and knelt beside a section of pipe that had been partially exposed by recent rain. "Ma'am," Pete said slowly, "this is very unusual. It looks like your irrigation system is connected to your neighbor's water supply." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your water system appears to be drawing from the property next door, not from the city main. That would explain why your meter shows no usage, because you're not actually using water from your own supply." Karen's mind raced, searching for explanations that didn't involve the obvious conclusion. There must be some mistake. The landscaping company handled all the permits, all the connections. Everything was done professionally. Pete stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. His expression had shifted from puzzled to suspicious. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see those permits, and I'm going to need to contact the homeowner next door to verify that he authorized this connection." "That won't be necessary," Karen said. "Quickly, I'm sure we can resolve this without involving the neighbors. Maybe there's been a paperwork mix-up." "Or, Mrs. Whitmore," Pete interrupted, his voice taking on an official tone, "if what I'm seeing here is accurate, this represents a significant violation of city water regulations. Unauthorized connections are considered theft of services, and depending on the duration and volume involved, it could be a criminal matter." The word criminal hit Karen like ice water. She prided herself on being a respectable member of the community, president of the Homeowners Association, volunteer coordinator for the annual charity auction, regular attendee at city council meetings where she complained about property maintenance standards. The idea of being associated with anything criminal was unthinkable. "There has to be an explanation," she insisted. "I would never knowingly violate any regulations. This is clearly a mistake by the landscaping company." Pete was already walking toward Marcus Chin's property. "I need to speak with your neighbor to verify the situation. If he didn't authorize this connection, we're looking at a much more serious problem." Karen watched in horror as Pete knocked on Marcus's front door. She could see Marcus through the window, moving toward the entrance with what looked like eager anticipation. When the door opened, she could hear their conversation clearly across the morning air. "Mr. Chen, I'm Pete Morrison from the City Water Department. I'm investigating an issue with water connections between your property and your neighbors. Are you aware that Mrs. Whitmore's irrigation system is drawing water from your supply line?" "I certainly am," Marcus replied, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I've been documenting it for months. Would you like to see my records?" Karen felt her knees go weak. The casual way Marcus had responded, the immediate mention of documentation, it was clear that this wasn't a surprise to him. This was planned. "That would be very helpful," Pete said. "Mrs. Whitmore claimed she wasn't aware of the unauthorized connection." "I'm sure she wasn't," Marcus replied, and even from across the yard, Karen could hear the sarcasm in his voice. "People often miss details like that. Please, come in. I have everything organized." As Pete disappeared into Marcus's house, Karen stood alone in her dying garden, the full scope of her situation beginning to crystallize. The landscaping company had connected her system to Marcus's water supply, legally apparently. She'd been unknowingly stealing water for months, running up his bills while filing complaints about his excessive usage. But the worst part was the look she'd seen in Marcus's eyes when he'd answered the door. Not surprise, not concern, but satisfaction. He'd been waiting for this moment. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Martinez Landscaping. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Tony. I've been reviewing your file, and I need to ask you something. When we installed your system, you specifically requested that we connect to the existing water line along the property boundary. You said you'd already arranged it with your neighbor, and that all permits were in place." Karen's blood turned to ice. The conversation from 8 months ago came flooding back her frustration with the city's slow permit process. Her impatience to get the garden installed before the spring planting season. She'd told Tony to use whatever connection was most convenient, that she'd handle the paperwork later. I need to call you back," she whispered, ending the call. Through Marcus's front window, she could see him and Pete examining what looked like a thick folder of documents. Pete was nodding, occasionally pointing at specific pages, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. Karen's phone buzzed with a text message from her next-door neighbor on the other side. "Karen, your sprinkler." 2 police cruisers pulled into the driveway of 1247 Maple Ridge Drive at exactly 9:42 a.m. their red and blue lights painting the dying garden in alternating colors of judgment. Officer Sarah Martinez stepped out of the first vehicle, her body, camera already recording, while her partner Officer James Wu emerged from the second car, notepad in hand. Karen Whitmore had spent the 20 minutes since hearing the sirens transforming herself from panicked homeowner into the role she'd perfected over decades of suburban politics, the righteous victim demanding justice. She'd changed into her most respectable outfit, navy blazer, pearls, low heels, that suggested seriousness without ostentation. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the morning's chaos, and she'd applied just enough makeup to look polished but not vain. Most importantly, she'd spent those precious minutes crafting her narrative, rehearsing the performance that would save her reputation and destroy Marcus Chen. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Karen called out, striding across her lawn. With practiced confidence, "I'm Karen Whitmore, and I need to report a theft. Someone has sabotaged my water supply and destroyed my garden." Officer Martinez looked around at the elaborate landscaping. Taking in the expensive irrigation system, the designer fountain meticulously planned layout that had clearly cost tens of thousands of dollars. "Ma'am, we're responding to a report of water theft. Can you tell us what happened?" "That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you. Someone has deliberately cut off my water supply. Look at my garden. It was perfect yesterday, and now it's dying. This is vandalism, officer. This is a deliberate attack on my property." Pete Morrison, the city water department worker, approached the group with his tablet and testing equipment. "Officers, I think there's been some confusion. Mrs. Whitmore's irrigation system has been illegally connected to her neighbor's water supply for months. We're talking about significant theft of services." Karen's eyes flashed with indignation. "That's absolutely ridiculous. I pay my water bills religiously. I've never stolen anything in my life. If there's been some kind of mistake with the connections, that's the fault of the landscaping company, not me." "Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Martinez said patiently, "we need to get a clear picture of what's happening here. Can you show us your water bills for the past 6 months?" "Of course," Karen replied without hesitation. She'd been president of the Homeowners Association for 3 years, dealt with city bureaucrats dozens of times, and knew that confidence was everything in these situations. "I keep meticulous records." She led the officers to her home office, a perfectly organized space that spoke of someone who controlled every detail of her environment. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their labels crisp and clear: utilities, home maintenance, HOA business, legal documents. Karen pulled out a folder marked water bills and spread the documents across her mahogany desk. 6 months of bills, each showing minimal usage, each paid promptly and in full. "As you can see," she said, gesturing to the bills, "my water usage has been completely normal, reasonable even. If anything, I've been conserving water during the drought restrictions." Officer Wu examined the bills, noting the dates and amounts. "Mrs. Whitmore, these bills show very low usage, maybe 20 to 30 gallons per day. That's barely enough for normal household needs, let alone maintaining a garden like yours." Karen's expression shifted to one of growing outrage. "Are you suggesting I'm lying about my water usage? Are you accusing me of some kind of fraud?" "Ma'am, we're just trying to understand the situation," Officer Martinez said diplomatically. "Your bills show minimal water usage, but your garden requires significant irrigation. There's a disconnect here that we need to resolve." "The disconnect," Karen said, her voice rising with righteous fury, "is that someone has been sabotaging my water supply. Someone has been stealing my water, and then manipulating the system to make it look like I'm the one doing something wrong." She pointed toward Marcus Chen's house, where the man himself was visible through the front window, clearly watching the proceedings. "It's him," Karen declared with absolute conviction. "Marcus Chen. He's been jealous of my garden from the moment I moved in. He's been filing complaints about my property maintenance, trying to get me cited for violations I haven't committed. And now he's found a way to destroy my garden and frame me for theft." The officers exchanged glances. This was turning into a classic neighbor dispute, the kind of suburban warfare that could consume entire afternoons of police work. "Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Martinez said, "that's a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Chen has interfered with your water supply?" Karen's mind raced. She needed evidence, something concrete that would shift the narrative away from her own culpability and on to Marcus. And then she remembered the security cameras. "I have video surveillance," she announced triumphantly. "I installed cameras 6 months ago because of suspicious activity in the neighborhood. If Marcus has been tampering with my water lines, I'll have it recorded." She led the officers to her home security system, a professional-grade setup with cameras covering every angle of her property. The main monitor showed multiple feeds: front yard, backyard, side yards, and the property boundary line where the water connections were located. "Let me show you what happened last night," Karen said, pulling up the archived footage. "I reviewed the recordings this morning after I discovered the damage." The video from the previous night showed Marcus Chen and another man, his brother David, though Karen didn't know that working around the pool area. "Look at what they're doing. They're draining the pool, manipulating the water systems. This is clearly sabotage." Officer Wu studied the footage carefully. "Ma'am, this shows them working on his property, not yours. A homeowner has the right to drain his own pool." "But why would he drain a perfectly good pool?" Karen demanded. "Unless he was trying to disrupt the water pressure to my system. Unless he was deliberately trying to damage my garden." Pete Morrison cleared his throat. "Officers, I think I should show you what we found during the investigation." He led the group outside to the property boundary, where the illegal water connection was clearly visible. The pipe that emerged from the city mains split into 2 branches, one that went to Marcus's house, and another that disappeared into Karen's elaborate irrigation system. "This connection was never authorized," Pete explained. "Mrs. Witt, the system has been drawing water from Mr. Chen's supply line for months. The estimated theft is over 40,000 gallons. Karen stared at the pipes as if seeing them for the first time. "That's impossible. My landscaping company handled all the permits. They assured me everything was legal." "Do you have copies of those permits?" Officer Martinez asked. Karen hesitated. She'd assumed Tony Martinez had handled the paperwork, but she'd never seen actual permits. The installation had been done quickly, during a particularly busy period when she'd been focused on organizing the annual HOA charity auction. "I'll need to contact the landscaping company to get copies," she said finally. Officer Wu said gently, "We're going to need to speak with Mr. Chen to get his side of the story. Will you wait here while we interview him?" Karen nodded, but as the officers walked toward Marcus's house, she felt the first crack in her carefully constructed confidence. The video footage that was supposed to prove Marcus's sabotage instead showed him working legally on his own property. The permits she'd assumed existed were nowhere to be found, and the evidence of illegal water connections was becoming harder to explain away. She watched through her window as the officers knocked on Marcus's door. When he answered, she could see him immediately invite them inside, his manner welcoming and cooperative. Not the behavior of someone trying to hide criminal activity. Phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor Janet. "Saw the police cars. Everything okay? Your garden looks terrible this morning?" Another text, this one from HOA board member Patricia. "Karen, the Hendersons are complaining about water damage in their basement. They say it's coming from your property." And another, "Emergency HOA meeting tonight to discuss water violations. Your attendance is mandatory." Karen felt the walls closing in. Her reputation as the neighborhood's most responsible homeowner was crumbling in real time. The gossip network that had always worked in her favor was now spreading news of her humiliation. Through the window, she could see Marcus opening what looked like a large filing cabinet, pulling out folder after folder of documents. The officers were examining the papers with obvious interest, occasionally nodding or asking questions that Marcus answered with easy confidence. This was not going according to plan. Karen's phone rang. The caller ID showed Martinez Landscaping. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've been trying to reach you. The police called asking about permits for your irrigation system." "Ma'am, we never filed any permits for that installation. You specifically told us you'd handle the paperwork yourself." Karen's heart sank. "That you were responsible for the water connections. That you handled all the legal requirements." The Riverside Police Department's interview room was deliberately sterile beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and a metal table that reflected nothing but hard truths. Karen Whitmore sat across from Detective Lisa Park, a woman whose calm demeanor masked 20 years of experience separating lies from reality. Karen had spent the drive to the station refining her story, polishing the details that would expose Marcus Chen as a master manipulator and herself as his innocent victim. She'd faced down city council members, hostile HOA board meetings, and neighborhood disputes before. This would be no different, a matter of presenting the facts clearly and letting justice take its course. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Park began, "Thank you for coming in voluntarily. I understand you want to file a complaint against your neighbor, Marcus Chen." "That's correct," Karen replied, her voice steady and confident. "I believe Mr. Chen has orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame me for water theft while covering up his own illegal activities." Detective Park opened a thick folder that made Karen's stomach clench. The file was far larger than she'd expected, filled with documents, photographs, and what looked like official reports. "Before we discuss your complaint," the detective said, "I need to inform you that we've already opened an investigation into water theft at your address. The evidence we've reviewed is quite comprehensive." Karen's confidence wavered slightly. What kind of evidence? Bills, photographs, video surveillance, witness statements, and documentation going back 6 months. Detective Park spread several photographs across the table. "These show the illegal water connections between your property and Mr. Chen. The city estimates the theft at over 40,000 gallons. Karen studied the photos, seeing her irrigation system from angles she'd never considered. The pipes that had seemed so natural, so professionally installed, now looked crude and obviously unauthorized. "Detective, this is exactly what I'm trying to explain," Karen said, recovering her composure. "These connections were made without my knowledge. Marcus Chen somehow manipulated my landscaping company into creating this setup so he could later use it against me." "Let's talk about Martinez." "Landscaping," Detective Park said, consulting her notes. "We spoke with Tony Martinez this morning. He provided us with detailed records of your interactions, including recorded phone calls." Karen felt a chill. Recorded calls, standard practice for contracting disputes. Mr. Martinez wanted protection against liability claims. Detective Park pressed play on a small digital recorder. Karen's voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable. "Tony, I don't care about the permits right now. The city's bureaucracy moves too slowly, and I need this installed before the spring planting season. Just connect to whatever water source is most convenient. I'll handle the paperwork later." The blood drained from Karen's face as her own words condemned her. She remembered that conversation now, her impatience with city red tape, her assumption that she could fix any complications after the fact. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Park continued, "Mr. Martinez also provided this recording from 2 weeks later." Another clip played. "Tony, about those permits actually, don't worry about filing them yet. I'm having some issues with my neighbor, and I don't want to draw attention to the property improvements right now. Let's keep things quiet until I resolve some other matters." Karen's hands trembled as she listened to her own voice casually dismissing the legal requirements. That would have prevented this entire situation. "Detective, you have to understand," Karen said desperately. "I was going through a difficult time with neighborhood politics. I made some poor decisions about timing, but I never intended to steal anything." "Let's move on to the complaints you filed against Mr. Chen," Detective Park said, pulling out another set of documents. 3 separate reports claiming he was violating drought restrictions through excessive water usage. Karen straightened, sensing an opportunity. Yes, because his usage was affecting the entire neighborhood's water pressure. During a drought, everyone needs to be responsible. "Mrs. Whitmore, you filed these complaints while your own irrigation system was connected to his water supply. You were literally complaining about your own water usage." The logic hit Karen. Like a sledgehammer, every gallon that had flowed through Marcus's meter to her garden, every drop that had kept her roses blooming and her lawn green, she'd been filing complaints about that very water usage. I didn't know about the connection." At that time, Karen stammered. Detective Park pulled out a calendar and laid it beside the complaint forms. "Your first complaint was filed on March 15th. According to the landscaping company's records, your irrigation system was activated on February 20th. Are you telling me that for 3 weeks you didn't notice your water bills dropping to almost nothing while maintaining an elaborate garden?" Karen's mind raced for explanations. "I assumed the new system was very efficient. The landscaping company said it was designed for water conservation." "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Park said quietly, "we've reviewed your bank statements. Your Water bills dropped from an average of $180 per month to $23 per month immediately after the irrigation system was installed. That's a reduction of over 80%. Didn't that seem unusual? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Karen had noticed the dramatic drop in her bills, but she'd been so pleased with the savings that she'd never questioned the cause. She'd assumed it was the result of the expensive water-wise system she'd paid for. "I trusted that the landscaping company had installed what they promised," Karen said weakly. Detective Park opened another section of the file. "Let's discuss. Your security camera footage. You showed the officers video of Mr. Chen draining his pool last night, claiming it was sabotage." "It was suspicious behavior," Karen insisted. "Why else would someone drain a pool at midnight?" "We asked Mr. Chen that question. He explained that he'd been documenting your water theft for months and decided to cut off your supply to force a confrontation. He wanted the theft to stop." Karen blinked in confusion. "He admitted to sabotage." "No, Mrs. Whitmore. He admitted to stopping the flow of his own water to his own property. That's not sabotage. That's exercising his legal rights as a homeowner." The distinction was devastating. Marcus hadn't sabotaged anything. He'd simply stopped providing free water to the woman who'd been stealing from him for months. "But my garden," Karen whispered. "He knew it would destroy my garden. A garden that was thriving on stolen water," Detective Park pointed out. "Mrs. Whitmore, did you really believe you could maintain that level of landscaping during a drought without consequence?" Karen stared at the photos spread across the table, her elaborate garden. The illegal pipe connections, the water bills that should have triggered suspicion months ago. The evidence was overwhelming, but she'd been so focused on the immediate benefits that she'd never considered the long-term implications. "Detective, I need you to understand something," Karen said, leaning forward with renewed intensity. "Marcus Chen is extremely intelligent. He's an architect, he understands systems, he knows how to manipulate situations. This whole thing has been planned from the beginning." "What do you mean?" "He let me steal his water for months, documenting everything, building a case against me. He could have stopped it at any time, but he didn't. He wanted me to get deeper and deeper into trouble so he could destroy me more completely." Detective Park studied Karen's face. "Are you suggesting that Mr. Chen allowed the theft to continue in order to strengthen his case against you?" "Exactly," Karen said, sensing she'd found a weakness in Marcus's strategy. "He deliberately let the crime continue when he could have prevented it. That makes him complicit, doesn't it?" The detective was quiet for a long moment, consulting her notes. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Chen provided us with copies of 3 letters he sent to you over the past 6 months. Letters documenting the water theft and requesting that you rectify the situation." Karen's confidence evaporated. "Letters." Detective Park pulled out copies of formal correspondence, each one detailed and professional. The first letter, dated 3 months ago, politely brought the water theft to Karen's attention and suggested they work together to resolve the issue. The second letter from 2 months ago was more direct, explicitly stating that unauthorized water usage needed to stop immediately. The third letter from 1 month ago warned that if the situation wasn't resolved within 30 days, Marcus would be forced to involve city authorities. "Did you receive these letters, Mrs. Whitmore?" Karen stared at the documents, recognizing her own address on each envelope. She remembered receiving them, remembered reading them, remembered dismissing them as attempts at intimidation. I thought they were harassment," she said quietly. "I thought he was trying to bully me." "So you did receive them?" "Yes, and you chose not to respond or rectify the situation." Karen felt the walls closing in. Every answer led to another damning revelation. Every explanation only made her position worse. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Park said, "I need to ask you directly. Did you knowingly allow your irrigation system to draw water from your neighbor's supply?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The honest answer would condemn her completely, but lying to a police detective was a felony. "The situation